It is time to check in with Chris Dimakos. He's our CJAD 800 legal contributor. And Chris, you pose a rather interesting scenario today for all the Seinfeld fans out there. I'm sure they remember the particular episode where George Costanza walked into his boss's office on a Friday afternoon and quit like I think most people would only dream of, right? What did he do? He let his boss have it, ridiculed him, and then basically, complained about everything there was to complain about, and then just quit and walked out the job. And then what did he do? He realized he made a mistake and walked back in Monday morning like nothing had happened. Now, that was on a TV show. This happened apparently in real life, and you're going to talk about this particular case, which is called Bishop versus Rexall Canada. So fill us in.
Yeah, we had and this happens often, believe it or not. There's arguments and things get heated, and one of the employees basically says, you know what? He uses the words, I'm done. I am done here. And then the employer, supervisor, was saying, oh, are you quitting? Are you resigning? And he says, yes, I am. And then he leaves, and he mentions to them that he's going to send his resignation letter that night. But that night comes around, he never sends a resignation letter. And then, lo and behold, the employee says, you know what? I didn't resign. It was a heated exchange, but I didn't want to resign, so I want to be at work. The employer was claiming, no, it was a resignation. He said the words, I quit. He told us that he was done. He shouldn't be working anymore, and that's what the court had to decide. And they went through all of the different testimonies, and in the end, what I found very interesting was the court said, anytime you have an emotional outbreak at work, you have to have a cooling off period. And that cooling off period, if the employer really wants to confirm a resignation, they have to go above and beyond just, instead of just banking on what the employee said during a heated exchange, they have to go out of their way to say, hey, we want to confirm your resignation, sign here, sign this document, and that has to happen after this so-called cooling off period. So what to take from this is that things happen at work. People are we're not robots. There's a lot of emotion sometimes. There's a lot of stress sometimes. And what the courts are saying here is job stability is important, and you can't sever that relationship just because you had an off moment and you were emotional at that time. So it's important for a lot of people who might have done something like that in the heat of a moment and then regretted it and said, well, I don't have a claim here. I said the words I quit, so I basically resigned. Not so quick. If it happened during that time, you might have recourse to get your job back. Okay,
keyword is might have recourse, or is this pretty much a precedent, do you think, for people? Because you say there's situations like these that come up regularly.
Yeah, so it's a very strong precedent, and I could tell you that nothing's guaranteed, but anytime things happen when there's a lot of emotion involved, courts always try to say, okay, well, that shouldn't be relied upon like as if you're having a normal conversation where there's nothing emotional about it. So context and circumstances, that's one of the reasons why, some of the best litigators find themselves in employment law, because contrary to corporate where you have numbers and shares and all these financial information, you're dealing with people, and you're dealing with people that it's never the same. Every situation is unique. Everyone has off days. So again, a lot of context would determine how good your claim would be and what happened. But no, there's no question about it. You don't want to say the words I quit. You don't want to put yourself in a bad situation when you don't want to. You want to avoid using those words. You want to get out of those emotional meetings, or if you're having an argument, try and get out of there without making any declaration. But if it happens, it doesn't necessarily mean that there's no hope for you. You should get some advice quickly and see if you can navigate your way back into your job, maybe with some changes.
Okay, so let me go back to this. I find this fascinating. This particular case that we're outlining here, beyond this guy just, losing it for a second, you said there was yelling, there were insults, there was a lot going on here. But then you brought up the idea of this guy saying, I will send you a resignation letter. That letter was never sent. So how much did that come into play when this thing eventually ended up in front of a judge?
Oh, it was huge. You put your finger right on it. That was probably the most important point. What the court said, and that said, listen, when it was time for him to send the resignation letter, as he didn't do it. And he didn't do it a few hours after the argument had happened. He probably had time to cool off and realize, hey, I don't want to lose my job here. I just had a really bad moment at work. So that was huge. And I could tell you when people talk about resignation all the time, and sometimes a resignation might come because you're left with no option but to leave. Work has gotten so bad that you have no option, and there's a difference there, and it's important that people know there's constructive dismissal and there's resignation. Resignation comes from the employee. It's their own choice. They want to leave there on their own merit. There's nothing that's forcing them out. Constructive dismissal still has that same employee leaving work, but they feel like they were forced to leave. They were being pushed out. They were being demoted. They were being treated unfairly. So there's a fine line there between a resignation and a constructive dismissal, and it's important that if you have your job and you feel like, hey, I like my job, I like where I work, I like my salary, but the work conditions are becoming so hard for me and so toxic of an environment that I have no choice but to leave. It's not a resignation. That's a constructive dismissal, and you can get the exact same compensation if you file a claim, whether you were fired outright or whether you were pushed out implicitly, right? So they made it so that you had no choice but to do so. So again, job stability is really important. There's a lot of protections available to people. Just have to understand what the dynamic is, and you have to understand your situation, how successful you can be if you file a claim.
Okay, last question. So we still have a couple of seconds here. With the idea then of resignation, let's say that's what you opt to end up doing. What happens to severance in that case?
So if you are 100% voluntarily resigning, not because of what your employer forced you anyway out, there is no severance in that case. That you leave. One thing I will tell people that they don't consider: a lot of times you have people that are being recruited from competitors, and they'll say, "Okay, well, I'm getting paid $10,000 more if I jump ship and I go here, so I'm just going to resign on my current job." Understand that what you're leaving on the table is not just a job that pays less. You're leaving a lot of security there. So you have to put a value on that. If you were with a company for 10 years, you have many more protections on terms of job security than you would when you join someone for 1 or 2 weeks. So when you're evaluating offers, if you're dealing with a professional recruiter, you have to put a value on what that job security represents. Because if you ever get fired from your new job, you will get maybe a week or two, versus working somewhere 10 years where you would be entitled to a lot more in terms of months of salary. So always important to not just look at the salary. What type of value are you leaving on the table when you leave from one company to go to the next?
All right, we leave it at that. Chris, thanks so much. Appreciate it.
Thanks, Aaron.
Chris Dimakos, our CJAD 800 legal contributor.